Hi guys, and welcome to another Facehammer video about the old world. There's been a few articles and news dropped this week. Obviously we know the pre-order day is now on Saturday. I will be releasing more content at the weekend, so check out the channel. You'll see the premiere times shortly. Now, also, I'm conscious that there's quite a lot of articles hitting this week, and I've been trying to keep up to date with the Almanack Articles, and I wanted to just do a quick video going over some interesting sort of threads I've picked up on from these articles. So firstly, we've got the designer roundtable about the lore, and it's quite interesting. So they basically talk about how does it drive its setting, and basically Jonathan, which I think is the lead designer, I might know him as JTY, says the old world is an origin story for the apocalypse. So across the decades of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, we covered the reign of Karl Franz, the rise of Archaon, and ultimately the end times. From the moment we'd established the Empire Wars and the Chaos Wars, we destined Archaon to descend and destroy the setting, so it was always doomed. I think the interesting thing about the old world setting is that they approached it from what is the Horus Heresy moment of the old world, what was the siege of Terra moment, and they said that the destruction of Prague and the siege of Kislev were pivotal, and the rise of Asavakol represented the true return of chaos to the old world. So essentially what they're saying, ever since Days of Sigmar, chaos have always risen every few centuries to claim the title of Everchosen. The Everchosen prior to Asavakol was possessed by Be'lakor and destroyed, so he didn't achieve it. But basically what they're saying is this is leading up to Asavakol, who raises up, destroys Prague, bringing chaos back into the world. He's defeated, but it kind of sets things in motion for the doom of the world that was, for people who are now into AOS. And so the date on the rulebook is 2276, so it's a few decades before the Great War against Chaos, and it's the year that Settra invades the Border Princes. So obviously that kind of hints at why Tomb Kings are in the launch, and it's a huge moment. You won't see the Siege of Prague anytime soon, but wheels have been set in motion. ... So there are hints at Kislev. There was some articles aimed at Total War, but with old world art and stuff. So I believe we will see Kislev in the old world rules as an army faction at some point. And it said that how much was already established. And I don't think it was ever planned to do a game set in this period. And basically, they said that Skaven aren't really around. That vampires were defeated, so the Von Carstar just defeated Helfen, so they're not really around. Also, there's talk about things like, sort of say that they can actually explore this setting a little bit more and kind of fill out the space. They're talking about creating army books, campaign books, treating it as a playground that they can explore. They said they might do it sequentially or they might hop around, but they're not planning to work their way step to Asavakol, but I'm sure there will be at some point an Asavakol model and all the rest of it. They talk about characters returning, so obviously what's relevant is Settra the Imperishable is back, and they talk about the Green Knight, which is pretty cool. They talk about these characters been around for hundreds of thousands of years, so naturally they're in the period. They said they'll start to see other characters you'll recognise at a younger age, so kings might be princes. That's quite interesting, that you might see little heroes of legend in different parts of their life when they're not that person yet, or that thing yet. Obviously the age would be a problem for any human-based character, but it might be quite cool for elves and other so on and so forth. It said there will be characters people recognise, especially those who are longer lived, so dwarfs, elves, that kind of thing. It's also a great chance for us to introduce new timeline appropriate characters. None of the characters of the Empire who are alive in the era of Karl Franz will be turning up, as they are not born. So Magnus the Pious isn't a featured character just yet, but we might see heroes who are just as important to introduce into the faction. So it does say there will be characters in the era whose deeds or fates have a knock-on effect leading to the end times, as well as ancestors or relatives or predecessors of characters you know and love. This means some older characters are relevant anyway without us needing to revisit the same character a second time. So they can kind of set up those heroes and those characters. There's some talk about the Empire background, about family names having been dropped in, and some of the maps. There's been hints and hooks in there. I haven't really had time to study the map and go back through my old books and brush up on my lore, but I'm sure there's lots of little things people have noticed. If you have noticed anything you want to comment in the comments below, I'd love to hear it. And then Holly says there's loads of nods and Easter eggs for veterans. I've definitely noticed a few things that have piqued my interest. So yeah, it's really cool. So they sort of saying, they talk about technology, but they didn't want to like make black powder worse and not have cannons and things like that, because they're saying that it might have been a little bit more rudimentary, but essentially you wouldn't have noticed because, you know, in the game terms, it's not worth writing a rule for handguns to be slightly worse. And also he said that there will be technologies that have been lost or forgotten, which is quite interesting. They didn't mention handguns here, and they basically just said that the colleges of magic are not a thing; they didn't exist. So the Hurricanum and Luminarch won't be there. So that's confirmed, because they don't exist. But you might be surprised something that do exist. So they talk about steam tanks, because they found a tank called Deliverance was used at the Siege of Prague. So Jonathan says that the steam tanks are pretty interesting because they were built centuries ago when Leonardo di Miragliano was alive. So obviously that's like Leonardo da Vinci. They've been around a long time, and basically they're sort of saying that in the end times, people talk about them like, oh, there's only 12 ever made and they're this really rare thing, but actually back then there were loads more, and it's kind of just come into myth. But they were kind of like a new invention, and they were quite plentiful. You know, they were new, but there's lots of things like that. So that's quite an interesting take. It does open up some design space as well, so that's really cool. So it says here that there's also less superstition. By the end times, it was commonly claimed that only 12 steam tanks ever built, but that's a mad myth. There were loads of them, so there you go. Tomb Kings and evil, was it always the case? They talk about Tomb Kings here. I think it's a bit of bad press, really. So they say that they're evil because Cetra wants to conquer everyone, and he would kill you, you bend the knee or you die. And they say later on they were seen as good because they were opposing a bit greater evil, I guess is probably the way to say it. I mean, yeah, they are kind of corrupted and stuff, but evil's obviously a matter of opinion. I think every faction could be seen as evil from the opposite side. But basically, let's say that there is no shade of grey, but JTY is basically saying that, you know, that they're ruled over by a tyrant. They want to kill everyone, subjugate everyone. Surely they are evil. He's selfish, wants all his deeds to be read out and stuff, and that's fine. Leaning into Cetra being a bit of a egomaniac is fine. Yeah, I guess you could label them evil from our perspective. They talk about Nekaf, the Cetra's herald. He's got this scroll he brings out, and he reads out all of Cetra's titles and epithets. I think that's really cool. And they talk about in the Arcane Journal, the Tomb King Arcane Journal. There's some gumph in there about it, and you know, there's a lot of talk, and they talk about Bretts. So they basically say that they've kind of kept the same classic symbolism and thematics. That he changed the way that heraldry, rather than being like everyone's an individual knight with their own castle banded together, it's more that people are kind of working under a greater lord, and they wear that lord's colours, and they might have a personal heraldry, but basically they wear the lord's colours because they're his knights, you know, in his land, and so on and so forth, which basically means you can paint your army in a unified scheme, which I think is really cool. A lot of people did that anyway back in the day. So with the heraldry, it's interesting because they said that they wanted them to be uniform, but also there'd be a kind of hierarchy, and the way that they could do that is maybe how ornate the shield was. Like, does it have gold trim, not silver trim? Does it have a stripe down it or a chevron? Does it have a fleur-de-lis? Whatever. So they also say you can take mixed heraldry if you really want to. There are rules for crusading armies, they mention here, where knights from king come together to undertake a grand crusade. So you could do that pageantry type look. It says with every faction, they continue to adhere to foundational elements established in written law over the years. Bretonnian knights aren't going to start carrying a gun, for example. But then Jonathan does say that the outcasts of exiled Bretonia may be willing to bend the rules, and then Rob just goes in 2-footed and says they can take black powder weapons and bombards, but it's not the knights that fire them. So that's the exiled Bretonians. So it looks like there's going to be like an exiled Bretonian list, which is pretty cool. And it says here that they, the reason that they're kind of, these are the knights that have gone into exile because they won't apologise for a wrongdoing. They won't take a quest to do a penance. So instead, their whole family and loyal serfs go live somewhere else, which I guess would be the border princes. The unique insanity of Bretonia that everyone starts saying, well, isn't it that noble to sacrifice so much? It becomes an honourable act, even though they've done it because they've got besmirched honour, and they may come back and justify using cannons, which is fine. I think that's quite an interesting article. There is a couple of things, like so there's a Tomb King Law and a Bretonian Law article. I'm not going to go into those. You can pick them up yourself and have a read. The gameplay trailer, I have looked at it. You can watch it yourself. It's very basic, very much an overview. Doesn't really tell you anything in the written articles. Haven't told you already. Yeah, I didn't see it as that useful, to be honest. If you don't know anything about the game, maybe, but if you're reading this article or watching this video, it ain't going to be that useful to you, I don't think. So this was a really interesting article, because I noticed this with the models myself, is that they talk about designing models for an old game where older sculpts and older technology, they couldn't do a lot of stuff they can do now. And you've probably heard me and Byron talk about the complexity of kits, or the amount of doodads and whatnots and things hanging off stuff, and how just because you could sculpt something in a space, you shouldn't need to. And looking at the old Brett models, and they're just beautiful in their simplicity, because it allows you to paint vast armies quickly. There's not a lot of fuss on them. If you want to stick shite all over them, you can. But basically, you look at a skeleton, essentially it is just a skeleton with a headband and a shield and a spear. It's like there are a lot of other things to paint on it, which makes them incredibly quick to paint, which is great. And actually, the actual assembly is pretty straightforward as well. So yeah, they talk about this in here, and they talk about they found a load of Bretonian art and heraldry and everything the design team had years ago, and they used that as a guide. This is quite an interesting article, actually. I quite like this one. They talked a little bit about how the Knights of the Realm on foot, that they could be belonging to Bretonia, but not just generic knights on foot, and not Empire Knights, not historical. So they talked about this Arthurian style fantasy questing knights, devotion to the lady, and they wanted to lean into that. So they've got oversized head pieces, which is great. And then they basically looked at the old concept art, and then obviously they can do a lot more with technology now, so they can probably realize that a lot easier with digital sculpting and so on and so forth. And they also have this lock motif to show that they've bound themselves to the lady as a reminder of their sort of faith, and it was a good way of showing off their devotion. I think the models are really good. They are quite busy, like you can see here, like there's stuff, but I think they don't look out of place next to other old world models, and I think that's gonna be the challenge, is to design new models that don't make the old models look awful, that you don't want to use them, and to try and keep them in the aesthetic. But obviously you've got all these extra tools and all this new technology at your hands. Even with painting, you've got all these new mediums and paints and products to use, so it would be really good if they can keep this going. So they said they worked really hard to be faithful to original designs and the Warhammer aesthetic. They wanted to pull back slightly where they went with the end times to simplify, the kind of the look, which is good. And I really hope they don't go too much busy, because honestly, it's one of the things that puts me off AOS, because the models are just very busy. The assembly is very time consuming, and when you've got to build like 30, if you wanted like 40 of these foot knights, that's going to be a real challenge to paint those. If you're going to be more and more detailed, there's more stuff to do, whereas painting 40 Bretonnian archers is a doddle in comparison. I think they're 2-piece, a head and a body, that's it. So assembly and paint will be really easy, especially with the transfer sheet that they've said you get with the box. So it says here as well, like the older frames had so much more space on them. So I don't know what he means by a statement of intent, but it's, you look at the old frames and they look very empty, and I think that's obviously because the molding technology has changed. So that space they could fill. I hope they don't go too mad. They wanted to do a centerpiece for each army, so the Pegasus and the Bone Dragon. The Pegasus is a bit archetypal for Bretonnians. Is kind of an obvious thing, really. They could have done a Hippogriff, I suppose, was the obvious choice. The miniature, it looks the part, and they talk about how they wanted to make it look like it belonged in the old range but was still modern. So it's coming at it from a contemporary angle. It's plastic, which is great, and they can keep it in the aesthetic of the old models. It doesn't look out of place, but it still is a very nice model. So the Bretonnia, I think they did a really good job of these. The Tomb King centerpiece, I don't know. I'm not sure. I just not sold on it being a dragon, but it doesn't really fit even in the lore for me. But it's a dragon. They've done a dragon. It's fine. They do talk about they've tried to use the spined dragon design, wings without membranes. So it's pretty cool, I suppose. I don't know. The head is weird, but that's just my 2 cents. They also talk about the magical vulture. They can push boundaries. Actually, it's one of the weaker elements of the model. I have, maybe I'm being overly negative about it. I don't know. It just, when you look at something like the War Sphinx and the Necro Sphinx, I'm just thinking, I don't know if it's that much of a leap. The riders are great. The actual throne is perfect. I love that. They're really good. But anyway, I'm sure once I get my hands on it and I can play around with it, I won't be that negative about it. But yeah, I'm not sold. But it's cool, and I think you will see a lot of it because it is a cool model. But I don't know. Maybe it's just, I feel like it's stepping on the War Sphinx a little bit, and they could have just done something more Tomb King-y. I would like to see like a massive scorpion, for example, or something like that. So anyway, so it talked about the Question Knight Paladin was one of the earliest miniatures they worked on, and they had to determine an aesthetic for new old models. So they couldn't do something completely new. There's a release of lots of classic models, and they couldn't just recreate what they did before. They had to kind of find that middle ground, and I think they've done a good job. You look at these next to each other, obviously these are new models, but when you've got these and these next to them, they don't look out of place and they look like they fit. I really like the foot-based knights in Bretonnia. I think that's a really cool idea. And then they said that they can capitalize on stuff in artwork that you could never actually do before. So they want to bend, not break things, push where they can in subtle ways, and they might push further out if they can. When they can come back and maybe redo some of the older models. And I think they've done a really good job of making these new sculpts fit. It's all about video games here as well. So some of the classic art has been resonating for decades, and I agree with that. I mean, I remember the Mark Gibbons artwork from the 4th edition codexes is still some of my favourite pieces of art. Seeing the Skaven assassin with his dripping blades, or the dwarf quarreler reloading and things like that. I mean, even like the vampire lord or Nagash's art, they're so good. Love Mark Gibbons art. I think absolutely fantastic. And then you have like stuff from like Paul Dayton, and even you go back to Wayne England and even Blanche. So many good artists and pieces of art I love. I don't know all the artists' names, so there's some art I love this style as well. I think this is a really good art style. There's a lot of this a lot of the stuff in the Brett and Tomb King book were very, very good. I don't know what the artist was, but I absolutely love the artwork in those books. So anyway, they talk about trying to be a love letter to what is Warhammer, and not lose the core identity of a faction. And Holly sort of mentions there's lots of other places for design and ideas there. So I think really what comes through to me in this article is like passion, I guess. The designers are passionate about it. It's obviously that, the designer is passionate about the lore and the game, the world itself. And I think it shines through. And I really hope when we see more of the game that passion really oozes out of the game, and just anyone who was passionate or hasn't had the opportunity to be passionate, who can now get into the game, it's contagious, right? I mean, if it's infectious. Enthusiasm is infectious. I think it's going to be a really I think it's going to go really big. I think it's a really good start of something really great. I think Old World's going to be fantastic. And we look at there's some talk about iconography. They do mention, it's quite interesting how they've redesigned the fleur-de-lis to look more Warhammer, where they put the sword in the middle and they tried to make it more angular, which I think is quite cool, because they tried to move it away from the sort of historic fleur-de-lis from sort of medieval times. And they also want to shift the perspective a little bit, that in the world of legend it's a beacon of chivalry and honor. And they are really that at this point in time. And the rest of the world is primarily meeting exiles and crusaders, not the paragons of chivalry that live in Bretonnia itself. And they reflect that in the heraldry coat of arms, which is, and the Tomb Kings are very interesting. They talk about trying to say that the Khemri is a collection of kingdoms, and it really is. And if you've read the Nagash books by Mike Lee, that is really good for giving you an idea of how those kingdoms are very different and how they work or don't work together, and how they have a civil war and things like that. So that's really interesting, that book, if you haven't read that. And basically, they talk about trying to take some of the ancient Nicarian gods, and also the mortuary cult, and how you've got things like, they talk about Ouroboros, which is the snake eating its own tail. It's like the infinity symbol. And they talk about the skeletal vulture. This is like a Aquila, right? But in a vulture. And they said that it feeds on the dead. And there's a phoenix imagery in there, but it's skeletal, because they came back, but not as the sort of the shining afterlife they were promised, but they came back as these kind of abomination, twisted mockery of their former glory. And they just talk about, like, it's they kind of the Lich Priest can't be seen to be too over the top, because they can't be seen to be trying to get power. But I quite like it. I think it's quite interesting. Those are the two new articles. I'm probably not going to get to cover the painting one or the other two lore before the weekend. I just wanted to record a quick video on this. I just think these articles are great, and just stay up to date with Warhammer community and read them yourself. There's a lot in here. I think you can agree that the aesthetic is really, really good, and I think they've done a really good job. Just tying things in, and the artwork's fantastic. And I'm really happy with the kind of the two forces on launch. I think they look great. And it's great to see them back, because I know that so many people were bummed out when they basically got binned off. And I didn't think there was a very good reason for it, to be honest. And I just love the fact that they were very popular. Like, Tomb Kings were a really popular army, and so were Brett's. And now that they're both back with new models, and yeah, it's so exciting right now. So stay tuned to the channel. I've got loads of videos coming out on the weekend. So I've got some reviews coming, which I can't talk about too much, but the pre-order stuff, I've been lucky enough to get my hands on that stuff. So I'll be doing kind of overview videos on the weekend. I will be doing deep dives into the core rules of the game. So I will go through in detail how to play step by step phase by phase, but also expanding out into things like unit types, characters, universal special rules, give you my insight into things I think are good or you should try and get in your army list, how to build effective army lists, tactics on hammer anvil, how to use fast cavalry. There's loads of stuff I can do from drawing on my experience and obviously like the new rules. I've also got a faction video that I can do for each faction. So that's the 9 that are in the main books that are coming imminently. All of this takes time. I will get to it. I will say to you that one of the main videos I'll do on the weekend is going to be my sort of hot takes of the rules that you really need to realize are different or change from 8th edition. So the sort of things that if you played before, what's really different that matters that may not have been picked up on in the articles and things because they're subtle, but they have a big impact. So I'm quite looking forward to doing that. And I will be doing full breakdowns on the magic laws and the magic items, but also the army lists for Tomb Kings and Brett to start. And I will go into the other factions from there as well. I used to play a lot of the factions, but not all of them. So some of my knowledge isn't great on some of the factions. That just means that, no, I can't cover it, but I can't sort of tell you what's completely different, what wasn't there before. It's also lost in the mists of time a little bit for me because it was a long time ago. But anyway, if you want to catch all the Old World content, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, get notified, watch this space over the next couple of weeks. I will be doing lots of Old World content. If you watch the channel primarily because you're into Age of Sigmar, don't worry, I'm still going to be doing AOS content. Obviously, we've seen some stuff teased. I will be covering the AOS stuff as it comes out, but obviously right now the focus is going to be Old World because that's where there's all that space to explore. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Please stick with me at the weekend and let me know what you think. And I'm really looking forward to the coming weeks so we can finally all talk about the Old World and everything about it. And yeah, I'm excited to get some games in. So hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll catch you all soon and have a good one, guys, and good luck on pre-order day. Hopefully nobody misses out. If you want to help us, you can click in the link below to Element Games. Use my Crystal referral code. You can get discounted stuff. You can pre-order everything, and you can get extra credit. It helps me. It helps you save money. They're decent customer service. So as long as the stock comes, you'll be fine. So yeah, I swear by Element, I order all my stuff from there basically. So if you want to help us, then please click through the link. Anyway, that's enough. All right, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye, guys.